in a way, that's kind of the message we received growing up, kind of like to blend in, to not stand out. Growing up, my parents weren't undocumented, but those around us were, like all of my family members were. And my uncle, for example, he would drive me to school, and I know he would drive like at the speed limit, to not cause any attention. And I think like similarly, whenever there was cops around, it's like, portate bien, calladitos, like it was always about not standing out. And so, that's something that I kind of want to talk to you about, because I feel like public speaking is standing out. It's being like having people's attention. So I'm wondering, like, was there tension about that within you, and like, how did you start to work on that and heal that?
Oh my gosh, 100%.
Hola, everyone. Welcome back to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. This is part 2 with Yvonne. In part 1, we got to hear about her story. And in this part, we get to hear about what she's currently doing. And it's a topic that I think will interest a lot of you. So I'm excited for her to share her journey into it. And also, we'll get into it. So Yvonne, welcome back. Thank you so much for doing a part 2 with us.
Hi, how is everybody? If you're coming from the first part, thanks so much for listening and coming back and tuning in. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes. So professionally, or at this moment, would you say I'm Yvonne, a public speaker, or what is kind of like the title that you give yourself?
Yeah, I would say I'm Yvonne. I'm a public speaker and communications professional and founder of Chats with Yvonne.
And what does that all entail? Like Chats
Yeah.
with Yvonne. I know you have a podcast. What else?
Yeah, so I am a public speaker, meaning I have been public speaking for 9 years now. And up until December, it had been almost like my side gig. So I would get asked to speak and got paid to speak. So I would do these speaking engagements. And then I started Chats with Yvonne, a platform that, as myself as an introvert, I was like, I feel like not a lot of people are talking about public speaking and what it's like to actually be a public speaker, especially as a Latina, as an introvert. When I started my public speaking journey, I didn't have a community of people that looked like me, sounded like me, or had similar experiences to me, where I felt like I could practice with them or ask them questions, as is the first gen experience, right? Sometimes. But so I created Chats with Yvonne with the full intention of sharing not only my journey in public as a public speaker, but also my tips and expertise and things that I've learned over time in being in the industry for so long. So Chats with Yvonne is essentially a space where I help people love and reconnect with the art of public speaking. I always say public speaking con cultura, because I want us to be able to fully tap into who we are already as speakers, because our cultura asks us to be. Like, it's just, we're storytellers already. We've been doing it for so long and practicing it. So a lot of us have maybe become disconnected with the art of public speaking because it feels like it asks us to be something different, something more corporate-y, something more quote unquote professional. So my entire goal is to really share not only the techniques to become a great public speaker, but also tie them very much to who you are as a person already.
And I love, how in part 1 we talked about duality and how that's been a part of your healing journey. And I feel like public speaking and being an introvert kind of sound like opposites. Like, what? Those two things shouldn't exist in the same sentence.
Right.
So I would love to know how, as an introvert, I don't know, was it like a big step into that, or was it actually not? Like, how did that bug or that little idea of being a public speaker come into your mind or life as an introvert?
Yeah. I started public speaking when I was in high school, right? Unofficially. My high school made us do presentations before going on to the next grade, that instead of taking a test, I mean, we took a test too, but it was a school, they had us talk about all the things that we had done and why those proved that we were ready to move on to the next grade. So I would do that all the time, every semester. And then my presentation in high school got featured on the teaching channel in California, on the teaching channel. And from there came an opportunity to be a keynote speaker at a education-based conference. So that's how it started for me. And I think that now looking back at it, my initial introverted self would have been like, nah, I'm good. right? Like we don't volunteer for that kind of stuff, not right away, right? Not without giving it some deep thought. But as a first gen and someone that was stepping into the college world and thinking, what things, what opportunities are going to help me build my resume, set me up for success, I think the first gen in me was like, this is an opportunity that I can't say no to, right? Like in my head, it was almost the equivalent of, hey, you've been accepted to college and you are going to this. It was almost like a non-negotiable for me, where I felt like, on top of me being a people pleaser, right, and all those things, it was just sort of like, I guess I kind of don't want to. If I was really being honest to myself right now, I'd say no to this opportunity. But it felt like an opportunity that as a first gen, I couldn't say no to. And so I started my preparation for it. I started Googling people. I started doing research because I just had never been on a stage like that. It was going to be to 1,500 people for 15 minutes. And I was like, I was just so nervous. I didn't know how to prepare for it, but I tapped into my creativity, right? As an introvert, what that means is we're also introspective. We think deeply and we find connections where sometimes there may not seem like there are any. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed about, that I realized I really loved about public speaking from that first interaction, was that it allowed me to put a story together and draw a connection between something and something else, right? Like it was just I tapped into my creativity more than I ever have before, and I think that's what I really loved about my process for it. So though it made me terrified, though it made me so scared, I loved the ability to connect these things for people and create a story. And then I always say this, but the reason introverts are really great public speakers is because we think that way, right? We've sat down for a really long time, sometimes a very long time, and we've really thought deeply about what exactly we want to say. So by the time that we get on stage, we're not just saying words, we're actually providing not only value, but also we've thought about it. We've thought about every single angle already, and I've decided that this is the one, right? And we've done our preparation. A lot of times for introverts, it's not necessarily, hey, I don't want to ever take the stage. It's just, I like to be prepared before I take the stage. I like to know that what I'm about to say is of value. And that's really important to me in my public speaking journey. Like, if I go on stage, if you come to one of my workshops, it needs to be of value. Like, I don't want to just give you this motivation, inspiration. Like, I want you to actually be able to do something with it. So that's sort of how it first happened, where I was like, I guess I'll do it. And then I actually realized, damn, I really love it. And after getting off stage, you're like, I can't believe I did that. Right? I was like, 1,500 people just came to watch me, and they're coming up to me afterwards and telling them that was amazing. Like, I never even knew that shy, reserved Yvonne could do that. So that was how I started.
Okay. I have to ask, because I think, like, I get that, like, maybe in the planning phase, you learn to love that, like, ooh, I like this. It takes these kind of skills for me, and then I create this perfect plan. But I will say, like, as someone who, I don't know, like, as a creator, let's say I've created a coaching program, right? And I'm like, oh, I love it. And I'm going to add this. And then these are the visuals. And then when it comes to sell it, when like speak it, I'm like, I shriek, right? So did that happen to you where it's like, oh, I'm loving the creative process, and then the actual speaking, was that harder? Was it easier? What was your experience with that?
Because I had prepared for it, it was easier, right? Like when I was in high school, I would be helping my friend groups with their presentations and like running through it. So I was doing it without even noticing already. And I really love I'm an introvert, but I love the one-on-one connections. And so what this was, it was for a lot of us as introverts, it's not that we don't like talking to people, it's that there's this energy depletion that happens, right? When there's a large crowd. Obviously, when you're in front of people in that large crowd, it's a lot of people, but there isn't much of an energy, there's not much of an energy exchange as there is when you're actually talking to them and they're replying back to you. Like when you're on stage, it's just a one-way communication stream, if that makes sense, where now you see social cues, body language of your audience. You get to kind of pick up if things are resonating with them, but because as an introvert, it's all about the energy and how much I have to give and how much I get in return. that's what depletes me. When I was on stage, the actual being on there, it almost came, this is why I say public speaking con cultura, because I don't want to say it came naturally, but I grew up with it, right? I grew up with my mom telling stories, all of my friends, like we all tell stories all the time. And
Yeah.
this just happened to be me by myself. I've always leaned into that. Like, I mean, I think I mentioned I wanted to be a teacher at some point, and or I've said that before. I'm like, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. And it's because to some extent I've always enjoyed the spoken word. I see it as one of the most powerful tools for connecting with humans and like sharing thoughts, ideas. So it is scary. Sometimes I go on stage and blank because I'm just like that. I overthink everything. But as an introvert, right, it is it's more of a one-way communication, really, at the time. If you dig deeper into it, it's basically two-way, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I see. That's really interesting. Do you think that it would have been different if the feedback wasn't positive in that first big kind of like moment for you when it comes to public speaking?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, at the same time, right, like the first initial keynote that I gave, I was ready to leave, right? I was like, okay, I did my part. I went on stage. I feel relieved that I'm done, and that was awesome. I got I got applause, right? I'm like, okay, I want to go home and like hibernate for the next 5 to 10 days, right?
Yeah.
And sure, maybe my experience with public speaking would have been way different, right? I always ask people when I start to work with them or when I lead a workshop, I always ask them to think about one of the very first times that they remember public speaking, because that dictates the way that they feel about public speaking today, right? Like, and I'll share mine in that I have two, right? Again, duality. My first one was my mom would take us often to McDonald's in the morning to get breakfast, which was like the cheapest and the thing that opened up the earliest. So we'd go to McDonald's, and I've always loved ketchup ever since I can remember. Like till this day, I eat way too much ketchup with my stuff. So I wanted more ketchup, and she's like, "Oh, okay, go, me pregunta, like go ask for it." I said, never mind, I don't want more ketchup, right? And she's like, "Yvonne, go ask for it." Like my mom has always been this like super bold, opinionated person, and I don't know if because of a result of that, I've been less of that, right? So I was like, "No, it's okay." She's like, "Go ask for it." I was like, "Okay." So ya bien regañada, I go to the line, and I go to the back of the line, right? And I'm there and I'm waiting. It was a long line. And I think she notices I'm gone for a while, and she goes and looks for me, and she's like, "Yvonne, ¿qué estás haciendo? What are you doing? You just go to the front and ask. You already ordered. You don't need to wait in line to just ask for some ketchup. They have it at the front," type of thing. I was like, okay. So then anyway, she ended up asking for my ketchup. So I knew that in social interactions, again, these like one-on-ones, I couldn't do it. It made me really nervous. And whether it was because I had the pressure of my mom, who's always been she's not
Like
afraid
more
to
than
ask for what
you.
she wants. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I almost like dialed myself down a little bit. Until this day, I always say like I tap into my mom a lot when I am public speaking. But at the same time that's happening, when I was in school, my teachers would always ask me to MC, or like I was the MC for our 5th grade graduation, both in English and Spanish. For all of our events, I was the MC for those too, like the host of the talent shows, the cultural events, all those things. And it wasn't because I volunteered for it either, right? Like my teachers would say, "Hey, do you want to do it? Like you'd be great at it." I was like, "Okay, cool." And I remember feeling good up there. I remember feeling like this is fun. I like doing this, right? And so it's been this kind of back and forth where, again, there are certain spaces in my life where I'm not as comfortable being the center of attention and speaking my truth or speaking out, speaking up. But then when I get on a stage, that's like, sometimes I feel like that's the most authentic version of me, because I'm tapping into the things that I really love. And no one else can tell me anything because I'm already up on stage. Like whatever people are thinking, it is what it is. Whatever comes out of my mouth is what's going to come out of my mouth. Like there's no turning back once I'm on stage. And there's something so peaceful about knowing that.
Oh, really? Ooh, interesting. Have you had experiences like being on stage not prepared first? Because I know you mentioned like a part of it, potentially like the fear from an introvert about going on stage and being a public speaker is like what eases that is being prepared. I wonder like if you've already experienced the duality, right? Like is it different when you're kind of put out there and don't have a script or you haven't planned it out? Does it feel different to you?
Yes, it very much does. I think when those situations happen now, I'm a little bit more prepared because even if you don't prepare for that one particular presentation, I've spent I'm not going to say an entire lifetime, but I've spent a lot of years practicing my craft and I know who I am as a speaker and I've I'm in the communications field, so for lack of a better term, like I just know what to do when those situations come up now, right?
Okay.
But I remember one situation. I was maybe 2 or 3 years into my career in tech, and I was on the learning and development team. And at the time, we were launching a product. There was some new application that the company was launching, and one of the PR person, like the head of PR and communications, came up to me because I was the only one in the office that spoke Spanish, and they needed someone to talk to Telemundo.
Oh
So they were like,
wow.
"Hey, Yvonne, do you want to do it? Can you do it?" I'm like, "Well, when?" They're like, "Oh, in 5 minutes." They just called. It's a
Oh
super
my
last
god.
minute thing. I was like, "I don't know anything about the product. I don't know," because I hadn't worked on it. I just knew that it was something that was launching, right? I'm like, "How am I
Yeah.
supposed to talk about it? Like, what do I even do?" So this guy sat me down, gave me like a quick 2 minute PR training, and he said, "Whatever you do, every time that they ask you a question, you can answer it however you'd like, but if you're not sure how to respond to it, always go back to your initial intention." In PR, they teach you, let's say my intention is to say this application is the best thing that could ever exist because it serves X population, right? If they ask me something about the inner workings of it or how it works, I would then go back to this is the best application because it serves X community, right? So there are certain techniques that over time you learn to adopt into those moments when you're not prepared. But it's definitely happened to me where I wasn't prepared for that. It was in Spanish. I'm not used to talking about. I didn't know what content. I didn't know how to say content in Spanish, contenido, right? Because those are words that you
Yeah.
don't use, right? So
Yeah.
it has happened to me, but in other situations, I mean, I think like facilitating meetings and stuff like that, I think it's so important for us to always draw from what we do know. And that's what we highlight. That's what we lead with. Because if we go into it knowing that we're not prepared, and then on top of that, I think to some extent there's always a little bit of preparation that you've already done. And as an introvert, we've already thought about every possible outcome. So we know what to do when we're put on the spot.
Yeah. What about like for let's say podcasts? Because like you don't necessarily know what how the conversation is going to go. Does that feel like public speaking to you, or do you consider that something different?
It does feel like public speaking to me, but not so much. Like it feels more, obviously, it's more conversation based, right? And so there is more room for things like the filler words. There's more room for, can you give me a sec? Let me think about it, right? It's a little bit different, but it is still very much public speaking, right? So when I'm talking to you, and even if I don't know the questions that are about to be asked, I have a general idea of what your podcast is about and how I connect to it, right? So if there's ever something that I wasn't prepared for, like I have a general idea of what we're talking about. And I think that's one of the tips that I give to people is, let's say you're a panel, you're on a panel, you're a panel member, you're a panelist, excuse me, and they don't necessarily send you the questions in advance. Well, at least you know the theme, the general theme. Maybe you've read the description of what the audience got regarding the panel. You know what your role and how you may connect to it is. So from that, you're able to bring up certain stories or certain points that you think could be relevant to that particular description that they provided you, and knowing who's in the audience, right? So there's a lot of different factors that play into it, so that even when you're not fully prepared for something, you can still have a great conversation and make great points.
I think like what I'm hearing too that you constantly mention is kind of like you're a bridge, you know, like you're bridging concepts, you're bridging ideas, or like you said, maybe your message and the message of whoever you're collaborating with. So
Yeah,
thinking of
yeah,
it that way.
exactly. Yeah. And it's like that's really what public speaking is all about, right? Like maybe I'll go back after we're done with this. I'll be like, "Shoot, I probably should have said this." But it is what it is, right? Like we are all I always say this, we're people and we want to be talked to like we're people. So I always try to remember that at the end of the day, as much as of an introvert as I am, as nervous as I get, people will understand me because they're also people.
Yeah, yeah. There's two things that I would like to explore. One, I think that this just felt as I was kind of like putting together questions, it felt really tied to the first gen experience because I think that one, it's about taking up space, and then two, it's about like maybe finding or speaking your truth, you know, and like being able to do both. So I'm just wondering, like, is that something that you felt like you had to heal within you in order to be able to step into this? Or potentially now that you're working with clients, is it something that you see that others need to heal in order to be able to step into this?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think when I first started public speaking, I was looking to be like what I saw on stages, and that wasn't me, right? And I was so young when I started, and so I couldn't connect with anybody that I was seeing on these stages on a on any kind of level, really. And I always aspired to be like them, and therefore in my public speaking journey, though the stories that I told were very personal to me, the techniques that I always felt like a push and pull with the way that I was speaking, because there were some moments where me, Yvonne, wanted to shine through. And then I was like, no, but that's not how like Tony Robbins did it. No, 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 but that's not how everybody else did it. Right. And so I think what shifted in me was being able to say, I do this. I am a public speaker. I have the knowledge for it already. How can I explore being more comfortable in my essence with it? Like, I'm tired of feeling like that's what there's one version of me up there, and then when I get down it's like, oh my gosh, did I do it right? I'm just tired of doubting it and doubting like who I am. And you can tell if you were to look back at videos of my first speaking engagements, you can even see it in the way that I dressed. I was trying to be like super boring colors, right? I think at the time my first ever presentation, the big necklaces were in style, like where you
Oh
have
my
those like
gosh,
statement
yeah.
pieces.
Yeah.
So ugly. Well, I mean, for me, the one that I chose, I was like, dude, that's so ugly. Like, why did I do that? Right. The nude, like thick heels, like it was just like an outfit that looked very like a señora when I wasn't one,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I was looking at the people that I saw on stages, like all the white ladies, older ladies that I saw, that's what they were wearing. That's what they looked like, so I was like, oh, not only have I always looked kind of younger than everybody else in the room and been younger, I was like, maybe they'll take me more seriously if I wear this kind of stuff. All of that stuff was really embedded in me because I had played the game of comparison, right? And
Yeah.
when I gained confidence in myself as a knowledgeable speaker, meaning I know and understand the techniques, I have the knowledge, that's when I was able to sit back and say, okay, now how do I bring myself into it? How do I make it me? One of the things that I say when I work with people is my framework is reflect, connect, share, right? The reflection piece is all around you. That's why I say, hey, when was the first time that you remember public speaking? Who do you channel when you're public speaking? I realized that a lot of the things, as I started gaining more knowledge, when I would talk about hand movements, facial expressions, right? These were things that I was already seeing in the storytelling that my grandmas would tell me, that my mom would evoke, right? When she was talking to her friends, or even when my mom would confront someone about, hey, why didn't you do this kind of thing in a more professional way? I picked up on her cues, right? So all along,
Yeah.
I was looking for this information somewhere else and acting like I didn't know it or thinking that I didn't understand it, but I had been living it all along. And so what helped me was to make the connections between what is and what's perceived as best practices and techniques in the art of public speaking, and then what my lived experience actually was like how I was seeing that be implemented and made even better through the women and people in my life. So that's where I began my transformation as a speaker, I think. And as a first gen, I think it takes years to be able to do that, because you work so hard to try to get your foot into these spaces that really weren't made for you. And to some extent, whether we want to or not, we lose a little part of ourselves, because in some way, shape, or form, our acceptance into these spaces for the first time is always dependent on someone else. It's always dependent on someone else's comfortability with who we are and how we show up. And so to some extent, whether we maybe subconsciously, we learn to dilute ourselves so that we are accepted into those rooms. And it's really not until you feel confident in your abilities that you're like, wait, hold up. This seems messed up, right? Or like, let me now help other people make it through here without having to do what I had to do to get in, right?
Yeah.
So.
And don't you think, like, in a way, that's kind of the message we received growing up, kind of like to blend in, to not stand out. I often think about, like, growing up, my parents weren't undocumented, but those around us were, like, all of my family members were. And my uncle, for example, he would drive me to school, and I know he would drive like at the speed limit, to not cause any attention. And I think, like, similarly, whenever there was cops around, it's like, portate bien, calladitos, like, it was always about not standing out. And so, that's something that I kind of want to talk to you about, because I feel like public speaking is standing out. It's being, like, having people's attention. So I'm wondering, like, was there tension about that within you, and, like, how did you start to work on that and heal that?
Oh my gosh, 100%. Well, on one aspect, right, my mom has always been a little bolder, despite her status, right? She's always been bolder in her asks. And I remember thinking, one, that was embarrassing. So I was like, oh my God, Mom, like, please don't make a big deal. Like, to the point where in elementary school, I was bullied all throughout elementary school. And it really impacted, like, now I think about it, I'm like, shoot, that really was messed up, right? But I never told my mom, because I didn't want for her to cause a big scene and be seen, right? I didn't want to be seen for that. And it wasn't until my brother joined, because, we're 3 years apart. So he joined the same elementary school, and he realized that I was getting bullied, and he went home and he's like, Mom, Yvonne's getting bullied, right? And then Mom was like, why did you tell me? And it was this whole big deal. Ooh. Sort of similar to how it happens now. Like, you need external stimuli to tell you, hey, this isn't right. Or, to speak up for me. But I agree, like, growing up, right, I also had things where, I always thought that the light, turning the lights in your car was, like, illegal, that you weren't supposed to do that. That if you had that on, the cops were gonna stop you, right?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I was like, and I looked it up the other day. I was like, dude, that's so not true. That's not even, like, a thing. Like, well, but to your point, it's like similar to growing up. There were a lot of things that were happening in my household that I always thought, if someone knew about these things, if we let somebody into this, there would be consequences of it, right? Like, there is a consequence to this, right? I mentioned, like, if someone knew what was happening here at the house, maybe they would go and tell, like, somebody else. And then there was just so much tension in that, again, school became this escape for me, right? It was like the one place where it was like, okay, I could just be free. So when it came to public speaking, I initially started it feeling very reserved, feeling like I'm only going to share certain pieces, even in the storytelling, right? Until this day, I'm very conscious of it. I would go into detail as to what was happening in my household, but I don't feel like it's my full story to tell sometimes, because it involves my brother, it involves my mom, and, like, where I may be ready to confront those things and to talk about them, because I think to some extent they are important to share, because sometimes I'm like, dude, we went through some wild shit, Other people, like, should know that they're not alone in this, right? But I'm so reserved with how much and how often I share, because I think about my family too. Like, they may not be ready to be seen. They may not ever be ready, and they don't need to be seen if they would not like to, for those things, right? And so when I started getting into public speaking, especially the type of public speaking that I do now, I know that storytelling is so important. And so it's been a journey of trying to heal myself through the stories that I tell, but at the same time, not exposing too much because I don't want to hurt those or shame those or expose those around me. So that is a very hard thing to balance, especially now where we have a community of people that are more involved in wanting to talk about these things and openly sharing. I'm like, there are some things that I just won't share because I just feel, I'll share them one-on-one with people. We'll talk about it. But I'm like, what if people in my life are not ready for all that?
Yeah. Yeah, you're protective over the family unit, and kind of that. I mean, and respecting them and their timing. But do you feel like, because you just mentioned being seen, do you feel like you get a vulnerability hangover after a public speaking event? Like, does that happen? Or because you prepped it and like the story you're telling, is it a little bit different?
No, it's never the same. It's like I always feel, on top of being an introvert, right, where I do so much preparation ahead of time that it takes away, it like drains me energy wise to do it. And by the way, when I say draining, I don't mean it as a negative thing. I mean it as just like, it is what it is. Like my energy gets a little depleted, right? It is very much it takes a mental toll on me too, to go to do the preparation and go on stage, because you are exuding so much energy, right? Like you are, I'll give an example. Even when I'm leading a workshop, if I notice that other people maybe are low on energy, I still have to be high energy, right? So like, because that's just, I'm the one giving the information. I'm the person on the spotlight. So after every single one of my speaking engagements, I just, all of a sudden, I'm hella hungry. I will literally get super tired. I'm like, I need to sleep. Like it is a lot. And it's also because especially when you're sharing personal stories, you never really know how it's going to go down. Like it could either be, it's so vulnerable, and it could either be something where someone's like, wow, I really connected with that. And then you could also just hear crickets. And that impacts the way that you want to show up or continue showing up and being seen, right? It's like, here I am. Oh, okay, never mind. I want to go back into my little shell again.
Yeah. Because essentially, like you mentioned, yes, maybe in the moment it's a one-way conversation, but in the let's say the totality of it all, it is two ways, right? You are getting feedback on what you're sharing. As you do this more, do you find yourself like less impacted by the feedback? Do you stand behind what you're saying, or do you see it as like feedback that you take into consideration for the next one?
I always take feedback into consideration, right? Like I think my most favorite thing about being a public speaker is that I get to understand other people through the lens of what I'm talking about, right? Because sometimes being a public speaker and telling stories, you want to connect with people on that human level. And I think that's what I really love and enjoy about it. It's like every single interaction for that reason is different, and to me should be different, right? And so even in the topics that I talk about, I may talk about the same topic for like the last three public speaking engagements, but I try to add different elements to it because I don't want to lose that human touch to it. I don't think that me talking up there is the end all be all of things. It's always just my point of view, right? And from my point of view, I'm seeing my audience. And if my audience is telling me either explicitly or through their body language, like, hey, move on, right? I'll move on, right? Like I believe that the art of public speaking is all about that human interaction. And that's what I center. So even as I've continued to public speak, the nerves around, is my performance going to be good? That has gone down a little bit, because I'm like, I've done it so often that it's just, it is what it is, right? Okay. The nerves for me come from, am I giving people all of the information that they need? Am I meeting them where they are? Like it almost becomes just about the people that I'm there to talk to. It's like, I want to make sure that they leave with something. Like I do this and I love this, but I want to spark some kind of mind shift for them or different connection that inspires them to go, in my case, right, to go and engage with the art of public speaking more. to like see that
Yeah.
as one of their strengths and something that they can and should be engaging in. So it's always different, and I always get nervous about something different every time it changes.
Mm.
Like, it just depends. One day I'll be like, ooh, I'm nervous because this stage is too small. The next day I'll be like, oh, I'm nervous because this stage is too big, right? It's just like there's always something.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm like, if it feels like as an introvert, it's like torturándote, like te gusta la tortura.
And that's why I'm saying, like, it's so funny, right? Because we exist again in this duality. Like, I think it's almost like public speaking is the tool that I use to connect with the people, right? It's my gift. It's my skill set. It's a thing that I have attached myself to be able to reach people and to be able to say, hey, have you ever thought about it this way? Right. And so
Yeah.
because of that, I'm so okay with it being like this, almost this emotional kind of experience, right? Where I'm like, I got to go and journal about this, right? Because it's the
Yeah.
same thing as like running. When I run, hell yeah, I get tired. I'm out of breath. I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I can keep going. Like, why am my body hurts, my body aches. But the feeling of afterwards is what's like, oh, okay, that was awesome. If I look back at it, that was such a good run. Let me do it again tomorrow, even if my body's going to hurt throughout the entire run. It's
Yeah.
just this like, it's my tool. It's the tool that I use. And I think it's a tool that a lot of us can use and leverage in whatever capacity, whatever skill set we already have, whatever passion we're already into. Public speaking just helps us amplify that.
Wow. Well, I think you already know, but it's so beautiful to see just like the different ways that your story tie into what you currently do, and that being introverted is actually what probably makes you a great public speaker, because being someone who also has that corporate background, and you mentioned it in part one, where it's like sometimes the people who speak the loudest are the ones that are heard the most, but aren't necessarily the ones that have the most value to give sometimes. The reason that they're speaking sometimes isn't that two-way communication of gauging. There isn't that like awareness or worry of like, am I giving enough? Am I giving the right thing? It's more like lo sacan without thinking about it. So knowing that you're so intentful about what you say and how you say it, I think that's what makes you such a special like public speaker, and it's what gives you that. It's the spark that you carry, and that I think that it's so beautiful that now you're working on spreading it, to others. So I would love to just give you a little bit of space for you to talk about what you're currently doing, how people can engage with what you're doing, and the services that you offer.
First of all, thank you. I think it's my hope and dream that more introverts will see ourselves, not that we don't know ourselves to be, but that we've been told consciously or subconsciously from other people that we are not to be people, that we shouldn't enjoy being on stages. I want us to accept that actually we have a beautiful gift of being able to tell stories, because we're so connected to ourselves and to the people around us that we're able to bring people together through public speaking. So thank you for those words. A lot of what I focus my time on today is not only the one-on-one coaching with folks that I call it more practice. Like, I think public speaking is really all about that practice. I always say this, like, you can go on Google and look up stuff. You can go on Google and look up top tips for public speaking, right? It's all around implementing them, but implementing them from the perspective of you, like saying, I saw this person, but that's not what I am. That's not my essence as a speaker. So a lot of the work that I do is to, one, center you as a speaker, leverage who you already are, your natural forms of storytelling, and actually help you realize that those things have techniques attached to them. If you're someone that moves their hands a lot when they're speaking and you've been told don't move your hands so much, well, there's actually a technique in body language where you move your hands to the rhythm of your voice, right? If you've been told, hey, you have a super high pitch before, right? Well, okay, I'm not going to attempt to change that, but this is how this technique applies to that and how we can use it, right? And leverage it. O, no sé, a veces when I hear, oh, estamos en el chisme, right? You're retelling a story. You're adding emotion to it. You may not see it as public speaking, but there's a technique attached to it. So a lot of my work with people is understanding that you speak already. Let's just attach actual techniques to it so that you can feel more confident and almost grounded in your knowledge as a speaker. And that's going to give you the confidence to show up that way, right?
Yeah.
The other part of it is I have my podcast where I talk about public speaking, and whereas other podcasts may be a little bit more on tips, I do incorporate tips all throughout there, right? Because I think that's just part of sharing knowledge. It's super important. But I almost focus it more on our lived experiences. I always say one of my superpowers is being able to connect anything back to the art of public speaking. I have a little segment called Tiny Mic Chats. And if you were to say hair clip, right? I could find a way to attach it to some aspect of public speaking just to help us realize that we engage with it all the time. It's just, again, sometimes, especially as First Gen, we don't see our experiences as being valid, as being a signal that we are good at what we do and that we're the experts at what we do, right? Yeah. So what I do is say, actually, it is. Look, this is what part of public speaking it actually is attached to. Yeah. And then content creation. I think through content is one of the ways that I've been able to connect with a ton more people, because I just share my lived experiences. I share my thoughts around public speaking, tips, try to make it fun. Like my entire point is, my entire goal with everything that I do is to create a space that's actually made for you to practice public speaking. Right? A stage that's actually made for you to practice public speaking, which is one of the things that I was missing when I started, was this space. And I just want people to feel like they have a space to practice, to ask questions about public speaking, to just engage with the art, practice with one another, create a community around it. Because at the end of the day, not only is public speaking so good just for us as community members, but also to get paid. Right? Like, it's one of the ways of us getting paid for what we know and what we do. And it's another avenue of getting what we deserve, right? From a space that so often doesn't give us what we deserve. They just give us what they think that we could get. And sometimes it's like, hey, come talk for free, which totally do it for free if you want to, but you could also be getting paid. So that's a little bit of what I do. And then the last thing that I'll mention is I recently launched a Latina Presente workshop series. So it's monthly public speaking workshops, and they all have different themes attached to them. My goal with them is to bring the essence of our cultura and who we are and our lived experiences, and combine them with those public speaking techniques so that we can leverage everything that we are as a speaker, tap into our essence, and be just great public speakers and get paid to speak, get promotions because we public spoke. So that's what I've got going on.
How exciting. I love all of those aspects. And I think that it's so important and cool that you're a first gen, you're Latina, because you can see like in your approach that you understand. Like, for example, I think that as first gens, we tend to put everything on pedestals. And so it feels so far away from us, right? Like public speaking or just any dream that we think of or any achievement, we put it on such a pedestal, like it's gonna take me this much to get there. And I love that you're like grounding it, like actually it's right next to you. Like either you already have the skill, or like you were born with it, or it comes from our roots, So I love that you're, like you mentioned, like grounding what it takes to be a public speaker, and showing us that we already have so much of it. It doesn't have to be this long journey towards that.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to look like what it looks like for everybody else. I always tell people, if you see me, and I'm only using myself as an example, because sometimes you'll be like, oh, well, I'm the one that's teaching you about it or talking to you about it, right? If you look at me and our style of speaking do not look at me as the example of what a speaker should be. Don't look at someone else for the example of what a speaker should sound like. It should be very much rooted in you and who you are and what you care about, because we're different. Like, how boring would it be if we all talked the same, if our voice tonation and modulation was exactly the same, if our body movements were the same? I think I've shared this before, but one of the pieces of feedback that I got in the corporate world before when I did a virtual presentation was, hey, Yvonne, you move your hands too much. Or actually it was like, Yvonne, you move your hands too much. You look clownish. They're making you look clownish and people aren't going to take you seriously. And I remember when I was impressionable, right? So I was so young in my career that really stuck with me and it diluted who I was. And to the listeners, I think it's important, think about that. Maybe you have a version of that's happened, right? Where you're like, wow, I internalized that piece of feedback so much that it's made me not be less of who I actually am. Because moving our hands when we speak, if you look around at your tias and the way that we talk, like our familias, the way that we engage with one another, we use our hands for everything. You quite literally bring people on a journey. If you're not moving your hands, that story's boring, right? So it was all for me trying to go back to my essence as a speaker. So I think it's so important as First Gen especially. There's so many things that we give up. It's important to know that we gave those things up and recognize, hey, are these things that were good for me to let go of, or are they things that I was almost forced to let go of? And I think that deciphering that and understanding the difference between those two will give us a lot of our power back.
Yeah, reclaiming a lot of the things that we thought we had to let go of. I want to throw in a few more examples because you made me think about it. I also thought like to be professional or to be taken seriously that I had to look older or that I had to speak a different way. And so I would put on these fake glasses. I didn't even wear glasses, but I would put on these glasses and I had like two canas and I would make sure that they showed and just like all
That is so funny.
things.
Te digo algo. I have these glasses. Y'all, people
Yes,
listening
like
won't be able to
that.
hear, but I have these glasses, and these are not prescription, like at all. Like they don't have a prescription. It's just like to your point, I thought the
Oh
same
my
thing,
God.
and also, it was almost like we had so many things. Not only, to be honest, even my height. I was always the shortest person in the room. I was always the younger person in the room. I remember there was one specific scenario that I'm reminded of right now, but we were brainstorming for a creative project. It was a promo video that we were going to be putting together. And I was in the room with people that were cool, right? Like I knew that, but it was three white older men, actually two older and then one younger white man. And then there was me. And I remember being I had these ideas, right? I was like, dude, this would be so funny if we did this. Like they were coming up with ideas and like, it was so typical. They were like, oh, what if we threw a football and then the football landed, it was like the sports analogy thing. And I was like, oh, this is whatever, right? In that moment, I remember, and this is something that I tell people to do when they're also engaging in public speaking, maybe on the more corporate side of things, when you feel really nervous about saying something and your heart starts to pound a little bit, something that I do is I will write exactly what I want to say down, right? In the moment when they were having their little discussion, I was writing exactly what I wanted to say because it was my way of committing it to memory and not stuttering. Like, because I knew that I was really nervous. I knew that I was in an uncomfortable position. And so writing it down and saying it the way I even avoided eye contact too, which I know that it's not like you're not supposed to do that. But I always tell people, do what you got to do in the moment. I'm like, if your voice is strong, but you can't look at someone, that's okay, right? Just as long as you get like practice one thing and then the other thing will come, right? So I wrote it down and then I said it and they're like, oh, that was a really great idea. But it wasn't until I decided to speak up that happened, right? And so again, in those rooms, I always felt smaller. And I think because of that, there were certain things that I tried to do to make myself feel bigger, but they never actually I don't think they ever actually really worked. Like they could tell I was like a baby. Even the way I dressed, I was like, no color, just like black and grays. And till this day, I mean, I personally really love blazers. Like, I think blazers are like my go-to for everything because I actually do enjoy them. But when I was working when I was working, I would see everybody come in like t-shirts and stuff. I was like, I could never do that. Like, you tell me that I can, and you tell me that I can come in like ripped jeans and a white t-shirt. But like if I actually did, you would think of me differently. Like you would, it was different, you know, I couldn't come on with Chulan with no makeup on.
I'm so thankful that we got to have this conversation and just share about this, because I think it's so many things that are relatable to people's day to day, you know, like, and I think the fact that we're both Latinas, we're both first gen, and that you have this experience and give it this different light is so, so cool. Can you just please let the people know where they can follow you, where they can find you, and engage with your work?
Y'all can find me on chatswithyvonne.com. That's my website. And then Chats with Yvonne across all social platforms. If you want to shoot me an email, it's also chatswithyvonne@gmail.com.
Ooh, okay. And yeah, I mean, I know you're on TikTok and I think on Instagram as well, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Instagram, TikTok, kind of on YouTube. I'm working on that. And my podcast.
Awesome. Yay. Yeah. And I'll make sure to link everything down below. Well, thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you for being here and for shining your light, because I think that, you know, even someone who's like practicing doing that, I know it's not easy. So I'm so thankful that you're stepping into your full potential and everything that you got. And yeah, I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your questions. I think they're super thoughtful and also thought-provoking. It's always great to have a facilitator like that when you're asking really great questions, and you're also a great listener. So thank you for setting this up, providing this space for us to chat and for other people to kind of tune in and listen to everything we got going on.
Thank you. Yeah, that's my thing. That's kind of my underlying gift, let's say, the listening part. So cool that you picked that up.
You are a great listener and pick up on things that oftentimes a lot of people won't. Or like I've been told before, wow, that was such a good question. It's like, yeah, because I listened to you, to what you said. I think you do that. You do a lot. You know, it's not just, I mean, I'm sure you have some questions prepared, but it's like, I can sense that you're also really engaged in the conversation. So that makes for a really good, comforting experience.
Yeah. Yay. That makes me happy. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, we hope you have a good rest of your day. Please make sure that you share this with people that you think might find this helpful. I think that this applies to any job field. I mean, like, speaking up, you know, like it doesn't just have to be speaking on stages, like you mentioned, getting promotions. A lot of us shy away from being managers, you know, or directors or VPs, because we know that it takes some sort of public speaking. So I think this episode could be useful to everyone. So yeah, make sure that you share it. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you have a good day.
Bye, y'all.